Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. Several new movies opened this past weekend that ended on April 7th, 2024, and two of them earned enough revenue to be in this weekend's top 5 movies at the domestic box office. But before proceeding, I'd like to ask everyone to please like this video, please subscribe to this channel, and please press the bell to receive notifications. Thanks! We'll first do a quick recap of this weekend's top 6 movies at the domestic box office, and we're covering 6 because Dune Part 2 was in 6th place overall. Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire retained the number 1 position in this weekend's domestic box office by earning another $31.7 million during its sophomore outing to bring its domestic box office total up to $135 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $112 million, which was nearly as much as it earned internationally last weekend, to bring its current international box office total up to $226 million. So globally, the movie earned another $167 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $361 million, which is more than its estimated mid-range break-even point of $337.5 million, so the movie has now marginally broken even and will be undoubtedly completely broken even by next weekend. In second place at this weekend's domestic box office was the low-budget action thriller Monkey Man, which opened with $10.2 million domestically and $2.6 million internationally to give the movie a global gross opening weekend box office of $12.7 million. In third place domestically this weekend was Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire, which earned another $9 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $88.9 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $14.2 million to bring its current international box office total up to $49.3 million. So globally, the movie earned another $29.7 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $138.2 million. In fourth place at this weekend's domestic box office was the moderately budgeted horror movie The First Omen, which opened with $8.4 million domestically and $9.1 million internationally to give the movie a global gross opening weekend box office of $17.5 million. In fifth place domestically this weekend was Kung Fu Panda 4, which earned another $7.9 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $166.1 million, which allows it to remain as the second highest grossing movie domestically for 2024 to date, behind Dune Part 2. Internationally, the movie earned another $46.8 million to bring its current international box office total up to $242.4 million. So globally, the movie earned another $61.2 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $408.4 million. And finally, in 6th place domestically this weekend was Dune Part 2, which earned another $7.2 million to bring its current domestic box office total up to $264.9 million, which maintains the movie as the highest grossing movie domestically of 2024 to date. Internationally, the movie earned another $22.1 million to bring its current international box office total up to $395.8 million. So globally, the movie earned another $34.6 million to bring its current global gross box office total up to $660.7 million, which maintains Dune Part 2 as the highest grossing movie worldwide for 2024 to date. Going back to Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire, it reportedly had a production budget of $135 million, which, when we multiply by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively, to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, as well as the additional costs of marketing the movie and other miscellaneous costs that the studio pays above and beyond the production budget, we get an estimated break-even point ranging from $337.5 million to $405 million. And that $135 million production budget is actually the smallest production budget for all of the Godzilla franchise movies that have been produced by Legendary Pictures and Warner Bros. Discovery. And just FYI, in this chart, I'm not including Godzilla movies produced by Japan's Toho Company or other studios, such as the ghastly 1998 Godzilla movie that was produced by TriStar Pictures and several other studios. But I did add Kong Skull Island, which is part of this franchise produced by Legendary Pictures and Warner Bros. Discovery, that I had not included last week. So to project what the final domestic box office for Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire might be, I'll use a range of average weekly drops that are based on one standard deviation above and below the overall average weekly drop for the past 4 Warner Bros. Godzilla movies, which is 39.47%. And with a standard deviation of 6.58%, that creates a range from 32.89% to 46.05%. Using that range, I can project that the final domestic box office for Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire may range from $199.5 million at the low end, $219.4 million at the mid-range, and $247.1 million at the upper end, which, if this continues, could make this the highest grossing movie to date for the franchise without taking inflation into account. To project what this movie's final global gross box office might be, I'll use the movie's current domestic share of 37.4%, which is lower than last weekend's domestic share but is still more than one standard deviation above the previous 4 movies' average domestic share of 29.57%. And using the movie's current domestic share of 37.4%, I can project that the movie's final global gross box office may range from $533.4 million at the low end, $586.6 million at the mid-range, and $660.7 million at the upper end, which is significantly higher than last week's projection thanks to the movie opening in more countries. So Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire isn't going to have any difficulty making a profit. Now going back to Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire, this is the 5th movie within the Ghostbusters franchise, which began in 1984. With a production budget that's only $100 million, when multiplied by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively, we get an estimated break-even point ranging from $250 million to $300 million. As I had explained in last week's box office roundup video, while there are 4 previous Ghostbusters movies, the first one has such a low average weekly drop that it artificially lowers the franchise average weekly drop too much and also creates too large of a standard deviation to be useful. So instead, I'm using the past 3 Ghostbusters movies to create an adjusted franchise average weekly drop of 32.02% and a corresponding standard deviation of only 5.13%, which gives me a range of possible average weekly drops from 26.9% to 37.15%, which is a very reasonable range. And using that range in conjunction with the current domestic box office earnings for Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire, I can project that its final domestic box office earnings may range from $115.2 million at the low end, $121.8 million at the mid-range, and $130.8 million at the upper end, which is lower overall than last week's projections as well as being a slightly narrower range. The movie's domestic share dropped slightly again to 64.32% from last week's 67.54%, which places it even closer to the franchise's average domestic share of 63.46%. And when I use the movie's current domestic share of 64.32%, I can project that the final global gross box office for the movie may range from $179.1 million at the low end, $189.4 million at the mid-range, and $203.4 million at the upper end, which is a slightly more narrow and lower range than last week. So it is becoming increasingly evident that Ghostbusters: Frozen Empire is going to flop and will likely lose as much as $46.6 million to $120.9 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when divided by 2 to account for the 50% of gross box office ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, means that the production companies behind it, which include Sony and Columbia Pictures, currently stand to lose anywhere from $23.3 million to $60.4 million. Going back to Kung Fu Panda 4, this is the 4th movie in a franchise that has a franchise average weekly drop of only 28.52%, which is somewhat low, and its standard deviation is only 0.49%, which is incredibly low. In order to project how well Kung Fu Panda 4 might do domestically, I decided to multiply that standard deviation by 10 so that I could create a broader possible range of average weekly drops from 23.66% to 33.38%. And using that range, I can project that the final domestic box office earnings for Kung Fu Panda 4 may range from $194.4 million at the low end, $201.3 million at the mid-range, and $210.7 million at the upper end, which is very similar to last week's projected range. And the movie's domestic share did slightly drop again to 40.66% as it continues to open in more countries. So I can project that the movie's final global gross box office will probably range from $478 million at the low end, $495.2 million at the mid-range, and $518.2 million at the upper end, which is a slightly higher range overall than last week's. Given that Kung Fu Panda 4 has a production budget of only $85 million, when multiplied by 2.5, we get an estimated mid-range break-even point of only $212.5 million. So like Dune Part 2, Kung Fu Panda 4 has already broken even and is profitable. And finally, going back to Dune Part 2, which is the last movie that I'll be talking about in this video, using the same range of possible average weekly drops from 32.86% to 42.86%, as I had used in previous week's projections, my revised projections for the movie's final domestic box office earnings now range from $281.1 million at the low end, $284.8 million at the mid-range, and $289.6 million at the upper end, which is very similar to last week's projected range but slightly more narrow. And the movie's domestic share only dropped slightly to 40.09%, so I can project that the movie's final global gross box office revenue will probably range from $701.2 million at the low end, $710.5 million at the mid-range, and $722.4 million at the upper end, which is a slight improvement over last week's projections and strongly suggests that the movie will break $700 million very soon. Given that Dune Part 2 has an estimated break-even point ranging from $475 million to $570 million, which is calculated by multiplying its $190 million production budget by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively, the movie has already made bank. So while Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is definitely going to flop, Dune Part 2 and Kung Fu Panda 4 are profitable, while Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire is well on its way to fully breaking even and being profitable. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.